The industrial kitchen of the Grand Palace Hotel buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Steam rose from massive pots while dozens of cooks hurried between stations, their white uniforms already stained with sauces and sweat. The breakfast rush was about to begin, and everyone knew what that meant: controlled pandemonium for the next 4 hours. Sarah Chen stood at the dishwashing station, her small frame nearly hidden behind towering stacks of dirty plates. Water splashed constantly around her feet as she worked the industrial washing machine, loading and unloading endless racks of dishes. Her black hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, wisps of it sticking to her forehead from the constant steam that filled the air. "Hey, dish girl," Marco called out from the prep station, his voice carrying easily over the clatter of pans. "We need those plates faster. The breakfast crowd won't wait for your slow hands." Several other cooks chuckled at his comment, not bothering to look in Sarah's direction. Sarah said nothing, simply nodded and increased her pace. She had been working at the hotel for 3 months now, taking the night shift at the dishwashing station while most of the regular staff went home. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills while she figured out her next move. The other kitchen staff barely acknowledged her existence, treating her like part of the equipment rather than a person. "I don't know why they even bother hiring people like her," whispered Jenny, one of the line cooks, to her station partner. "She probably doesn't even understand half of what we're saying. Just stands there all quiet, doing her little dish duty." The comments weren't new to Sarah. She had heard variations of them for months. Assumptions about her background, her education, her capabilities. The kitchen staff saw a quiet Asian woman working the lowest position in their hierarchy and made their judgments accordingly. They never bothered to ask about her story, never showed interest in getting to know her as anything more than the person who cleaned their dishes. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been watching them. Every night for 3 months, she observed their techniques, their timing, their recipes. She noticed when the head chef was stressed and made mistakes, when the sous chef took shortcuts that affected quality, when the line cooks wasted ingredients or prepared dishes incorrectly. She saw everything from her position by the industrial sinks, invisible to those who considered themselves above her station. During her breaks, Sarah would sometimes walk through the hotel's elegant dining rooms, observing the guests and the service. She watched how the waitstaff interacted with customers, how the maitre d' handled difficult situations, how the entire operation flowed from kitchen to table. The Grand Palace Hotel prided itself on excellence, but Sarah could see the cracks in their operation that others missed. The breakfast rush began in earnest around 7 in the morning. Orders started flowing in from the elegant restaurant upstairs. Eggs Benedict for table 12, French toast for the family by the window, steel-cut oats for the business executive who ate the same thing every Tuesday. The kitchen moved with practiced efficiency, but Sarah noticed the small problems that would eventually become bigger ones. The hollandaise sauce was separating slightly, not enough for guests to complain, but enough to show that someone hadn't been paying attention to temperature control. The bacon was coming out unevenly cooked because the grill wasn't being managed properly. Fresh fruit garnishes were being prepared too far in advance, losing their vibrant appearance by the time they reached the tables. Sarah, Chef Williams, the head chef, called out without looking in her direction, "We need those breakfast plates cleaned and ready." "The servers are backing up." His tone was sharp, treating her like a piece of equipment that wasn't performing optimally. She quickened her pace again, her hands moving efficiently through the routine she had perfected over months of practice. Load the racks, spray the dishes, run them through the machine, unload and stack. Repeat endlessly while the kitchen chaos swirled around her. The steam from the dishwasher mixed with the cooking steam, creating a fog that seemed to separate her world from theirs. As the morning progressed, Sarah overheard conversations that revealed more about the hotel's operations than anyone realized. The accounting issues that were causing supply problems, the staff scheduling conflicts that left them understaffed during peak times, the upcoming inspection that had management worried about maintaining their prestigious 4-star rating. "Did you hear about the new management team coming in next week?" one of the sous chefs mentioned during a brief lull. "Apparently corporate is sending in some hotshot to evaluate our operations. Word is they're looking to make changes." The kitchen staff exchanged worried glances. Changes in the hotel industry usually meant layoffs, restructuring, or both. Everyone knew their jobs could be on the line if the new management decided their performance wasn't up to standard. The tension in the air was palpable, mixing with the steam and creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. Sarah continued her work, saying nothing but absorbing every detail. She understood more about the hotel's operations than anyone suspected, having spent months observing not just the kitchen but the entire establishment. From her invisible position, she had gained insights that even the current management team lacked. As the breakfast rush finally began to wind down around 11, Sarah noticed Chef Williams looking particularly stressed. He had been at the hotel for 15 years, working his way up from line cook to head chef, but lately the pressure had been showing. His techniques were still solid, but his leadership was becoming erratic. The kitchen staff respected him, but they also feared his unpredictable mood swings. "All right, people," Chef Williams announced to the kitchen. "Clean up your stations and get ready for lunch prep. And remember, we've got that corporate visit next week. Everything needs to be perfect or heads are going to roll." The kitchen staff busied themselves with cleaning and preparation for the next service. Sarah continued her endless cycle of washing dishes, invisible to those around her but seeing everything. She knew changes were coming to the Grand Palace Hotel, changes that would affect everyone in that steamy kitchen. What none of them realized was that the person who would determine their future was already among them, hidden behind the steam and dismissed as insignificant. The woman they barely acknowledged, the quiet dishwasher they took for granted, was about to reveal herself in ways that would shock everyone in that kitchen. The stage was set for a revelation that would change everything at the Grand Palace Hotel. The weekend brought the usual chaos to the Grand Palace Hotel. Convention guests filled every room. Wedding parties demanded special menus, and the restaurant was booked solid from morning until late evening. Sarah worked her regular night shifts, but the increased volume meant longer hours and more intensive work for everyone in the kitchen. By Saturday evening, the stress was showing on everyone's faces. The kitchen had been operating at full capacity for nearly 12 hours straight, and tempers were beginning to fray. Chef Williams had already snapped at 3 different line cooks. The dishwashing area was backed up with dirty plates and glasses, and several orders had been sent back from the dining room due to minor mistakes. "This is insane," muttered Tony, one of the line cooks, as he plated another order of the hotel's signature salmon dish. "We're drowning in orders and management just keeps pushing for faster service. Something's got to give." Sarah worked steadily at her station, but she could see the problems multiplying throughout the kitchen. The coordination between stations was breaking down under pressure. The garnish station was falling behind, causing delays in getting finished plates to the pass. The sauce station was running low on several key items but hadn't communicated this to the prep cooks in time to avoid shortages. More troubling to Sarah was what she observed about the overall operation. The hotel systems were outdated and inefficient. Food costs were higher than they needed to be due to poor inventory management and waste. Staff scheduling was haphazard, leading to either overstaffing during slow periods or dangerous understaffing during rushes. The training programs were inadequate, leaving new employees to figure things out on their own. During her dinner break, Sarah walked through the hotel's public areas as she often did. She noticed things that the regular staff had become blind to through familiarity. The lobby carpet needed replacement in high-traffic areas. Several light fixtures were dim or flickering. The concierge desk was positioned in a way that created bottlenecks during check-in times. Small problems that affected the guest experience but went unaddressed because no one was looking at the big picture. Back in the kitchen for the final push of the evening, Sarah overheard a conversation that made her pay closer attention. 2 of the sous chefs were discussing the upcoming corporate visit with obvious anxiety. "I heard they're bringing in a whole team," said Marcus, glancing around to make sure Chef Williams wasn't within earshot. "Operations specialist, financial analysts, the works. They're going to examine everything with a microscope. My cousin works at the downtown location," added Rebecca. "Same thing happened there 6 months ago. Half the management team was gone within a month and they restructured the entire operation. Some people got promoted, others got reassigned or let go." The fear was spreading through the kitchen staff like wildfire. Everyone knew the hotel industry was competitive and unforgiving. Corporate restructuring usually meant that someone's job was on the line and no one felt safe. The uncertainty was affecting their work, creating even more mistakes and inefficiencies. Sarah listened to their concerns while continuing her methodical work at the dishwashing station. She understood their fear, but she also knew something they didn't. The corporate team coming to evaluate the hotel wasn't just looking for problems to fix or people to blame. They were looking for solutions, for ways to improve operations while maintaining the quality and service that guests expected. As the evening finally wound down and the kitchen began its closing routine, Sarah noticed Chef Williams looking particularly defeated. He had been with the hotel for 15 years, had worked his way up through every position in the kitchen, and genuinely cared about the quality of food they served. But the pressure of maintaining standards while dealing with operational inefficiencies was wearing him down. "Sarah," he called out, his voice lacking its usual authority, "make sure those pots are spotless tonight. Can't have the corporate people finding any problems in the dish area." It was the first time in months that he had addressed her by name, rather than just calling her dish girl or giving orders to the air. The small acknowledgement meant more than he probably realized, but it also highlighted how invisible she had been to the very people whose jobs might soon depend on the observations she had been making. After the kitchen closed and most of the staff had gone home, Sarah remained behind to finish the deep cleaning that was part of her night shift duties. The empty kitchen looked different in the quiet darkness, with only the emergency lighting casting shadows on the stainless steel surfaces. This was when she did some of her most important work, the work that no one else knew about. Sarah pulled out a small notebook that she kept hidden in her locker. For months, she had been documenting everything she observed about the hotel's operations, not in a critical or judgmental way, but as a comprehensive analysis of how things actually worked versus how they could work better. Her notes covered everything from kitchen workflow patterns to guest service bottlenecks to supply chain inefficiencies. Page after page of observations, each one backed up by specific examples and potential solutions. She had studied the hotel's operations with the thoroughness of someone who understood that successful hospitality management required attention to every detail, no matter how small. Her invisible position had given her a unique perspective that no traditional management assessment could provide. The corporate team was arriving on Monday. Sarah knew this because she had processed their reservation requests, had overheard the management meetings about preparing for their visit, and had observed the nervous energy that was building throughout the hotel staff. What the staff didn't know was that she had been preparing for this visit in her own way. Sunday brought a brief respite from the chaos, but the tension in the kitchen was still palpable. Everyone was trying to work extra carefully, double-checking everything, making sure their stations were perfectly organized. The fear of making a mistake that might cost them their jobs was affecting their usual rhythm and efficiency. Sarah worked her regular shift, but she also spent time walking through different areas of the hotel, making final observations and notes. She watched the housekeeping staff, the front desk operations, the maintenance routines. She observed the guest interactions, the service patterns, the small moments where the hotel's reputation was either enhanced or diminished. By Sunday evening, Sarah had completed her comprehensive analysis of the Grand Palace Hotel's operations. Her notebook contained detailed observations about every department, along with practical suggestions for improvement that took into account both operational efficiency and employee welfare. She had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, though none of her colleagues knew it. As she finished her shift and prepared to leave the hotel for the weekend, Sarah looked back at the kitchen one last time. Tomorrow, everything would change. The corporate team would arrive, evaluations would begin, and decisions would be made that would affect every person who worked in that building. The kitchen staff who had dismissed her, ignored her, and treated her as invisible were about to discover that she had been the most observant person among them all along. Monday morning arrived with an unusual tension hanging over the Grand Palace Hotel. Word had spread quickly through all departments that the corporate evaluation team had arrived early and was already conducting their assessment. By 7 in the morning, everyone from housekeeping to management was on edge, trying to appear busy and competent while wondering what the visitors were observing. In the kitchen, the breakfast preparation began with nervous energy. Chef Williams had arrived an hour earlier than usual to personally inspect every station, every piece of equipment, every detail that might be scrutinized by the corporate team. His anxiety was infectious, spreading to every cook and server who entered the kitchen. "Remember," he announced to the morning crew, "everything needs to be perfect today. No shortcuts, no mistakes, no excuses. These people are here to evaluate everything we do, and our jobs depend on making a good impression." Sarah arrived for her shift change at 8 o'clock, taking over from the day dishwasher, who whispered nervously about the suits who had been walking through various parts of the hotel since dawn. She settled into her familiar routine, but today felt different. The kitchen staff who usually ignored her were so focused on their own performance that they paid even less attention to her presence. The breakfast rush began, with everyone trying to work with exaggerated precision. Every plate was inspected twice before leaving the pass. Every garnish was placed with careful attention to presentation. The coordination between stations was more deliberate, with cooks clearly communicating each step to avoid any confusion or delay. Despite their efforts, the unusual pressure was creating exactly the kind of problems they were trying to avoid. Orders took longer because everyone was double-checking everything. The communication between stations became stilted and formal, rather than the natural flow they had developed over months of working together. Several orders had to be remade when nervous cooks made mistakes they would normally never make. Around 10 o'clock, the corporate evaluation team made their first appearance in the kitchen. 3 people in business suits entered through the main doors, clipboards and tablets in hand. Observing everything with professional detachment, the kitchen noise level dropped noticeably as everyone became conscious of being watched. Sarah continued her work at the dishwashing station, but she observed the evaluation team with interest. The lead evaluator was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She moved through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who understood restaurant operations intimately. Her 2 companions took notes while she asked pointed questions about procedures, costs, and efficiency metrics. Chef Williams followed the team nervously, trying to explain and justify every aspect of the kitchen's operation. His usual authority was replaced by an eagerness to please that made him stumble over simple explanations. The evaluation team listened politely, but maintained their professional distance, asking follow-up questions that revealed they were looking deeper than surface-level compliance. "Your food cost percentages seem high for this market," the lead evaluator noted, consulting her tablet. "What steps are you taking to address waste management and inventory control?" Chef Williams fumbled through an explanation about supplier relationships and portion control, but it was clear he didn't have comprehensive answers to her questions. The evaluation team made notes without expressing approval or criticism, maintaining the neutral demeanor that was making everyone increasingly nervous. The team spent nearly an hour in the kitchen, observing different stations and asking detailed questions about everything from safety procedures to staff training protocols. They watched the lunch preparation begin, noting the coordination between departments and the flow of orders from dining room to kitchen. Sarah noticed something that the nervous kitchen staff missed. The lead evaluator's questions weren't focused on finding fault or assigning blame. Instead, she was trying to understand how the current systems worked and where improvements might be possible. Her inquiries about staff satisfaction, training programs, and career development suggested someone who understood that operational success depended on employee engagement. After the evaluation team left the kitchen, the relief among the staff was palpable but temporary. Everyone knew they would be back, and the pressure to maintain perfect performance was exhausting. The natural rhythm and teamwork that made the kitchen function effectively was being disrupted by everyone's determination to avoid making mistakes. "I can't keep this up all week," muttered Jennifer, one of the line cooks, during a brief break between services. "I'm so nervous about messing up that I'm actually making more mistakes than usual. This is crazy." Her sentiment was shared by most of the kitchen staff. The constant pressure to perform perfectly was counterproductive, creating stress that affected their ability to work effectively. Sarah could see that if this continued for the entire evaluation period, the team would end up presenting a worse version of themselves than they normally were. The lunch service proceeded with the same artificial precision as breakfast. Every dish was scrutinized, every timing carefully calculated, every interaction between staff members conducted with formal politeness rather than their usual comfortable banter. The evaluation team made 2 more brief appearances, observing specific procedures and asking questions that sent Chef Williams scrambling for documentation and explanations. During her afternoon break, Sarah walked through the hotel's public areas again. She could see the same nervous energy affecting every department. Front desk staff were unnaturally formal with guests. Housekeeping staff moved with exaggerated efficiency. Even the maintenance crew seemed to be polishing fixtures that were already spotless. The corporate evaluation team was conducting interviews throughout the day, meeting with department heads and selected staff members in a conference room that had been set up as their temporary headquarters. Sarah watched employees enter and exit these meetings, most of them looking anxious and uncertain about what had been discussed. As her shift continued, Sarah overheard fragments of conversation that revealed how the evaluation was progressing. The financial analysis was revealing inefficiencies that everyone suspected, but no one had quantified. The operational assessment was identifying bottlenecks and redundancies that were costing both time and money. The staff interviews were uncovering communication problems and training gaps that affected performance. By evening, the hotel felt like it was holding its breath. The first day of corporate evaluation had revealed enough issues to confirm that changes were inevitable, but no one knew yet what form those changes would take. The uncertainty was affecting everyone's ability to work naturally and effectively. Sarah completed her evening shift with the same methodical efficiency she had maintained for months, but she was preparing for something that would happen soon. The evaluation team was gathering information and forming conclusions, but they were still missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. They were seeing the hotel's operations from the management perspective, but they weren't seeing the detailed, ground-level observations that could provide the insights needed for meaningful improvement. As she prepared to leave that evening, Sarah made a decision. The time had come to reveal who she really was and why she had been working at the Grand Palace Hotel for the past 3 months. Tomorrow, the corporate evaluation team would receive information that would change their entire assessment of the hotel's operations and potential. The kitchen staff who had dismissed her as insignificant were about to learn that their quiet dishwasher had been conducting the most comprehensive evaluation of all. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected shift in the evaluation process. Hotel staff arrived to find a message from management requesting that all department heads attend a mandatory meeting at 9 o'clock in the main conference room. The corporate evaluation team had apparently made some significant discoveries during their first day of assessment. In the kitchen, the usual breakfast preparation was subdued. Chef Williams had been called to an early meeting with the evaluation team, leaving the sous chefs to manage the morning service. Without his nervous energy permeating the workspace, the kitchen staff began to settle into something closer to their natural working rhythm. Sarah arrived for her shift to find the kitchen buzzing with speculation about what the corporate team had discovered. The prevailing theory was that serious operational problems had been identified, possibly serious enough to result in immediate management changes or departmental restructuring. "I heard they found major issues with the inventory systems," whispered Marcus during the breakfast prep. "Apparently the waste percentages are way higher than corporate standards allow." "My friend in accounting said they're questioning the entire cost structure," added Rebecca. "Something about efficiency metrics that don't match other properties in the chain." The speculation continued throughout the morning, but Sarah noticed that the kitchen was actually functioning better, without the artificial pressure of trying to impress the evaluators. The natural teamwork and communication patterns that had been disrupted by yesterday's stress were beginning to reassert themselves. Around 10:30, Chef Williams returned from his meeting looking pale and shaken. He gathered the kitchen staff together, his usual commanding presence replaced by obvious uncertainty. "The corporate team wants to meet with each department individually this afternoon," he announced. "They're conducting what they call comprehensive operational interviews with every employee, starting with senior staff and working down through all positions." A murmur of anxiety rippled through the assembled cooks and prep staff. Individual interviews meant that everyone would be questioned directly about their work, their observations, and their opinions about the hotel's operations. For many of them, it felt like being called before a tribunal to defend their jobs. "What kind of questions are they asking?" asked Tony, voicing the concern that everyone was feeling. Chef Williams shrugged helplessly. "They want to understand how things really work versus how they're supposed to work. They're asking about problems, inefficiencies, communication issues, everything that affects our ability to do our jobs effectively." Sarah continued her work while listening to the increasingly nervous discussions around the kitchen. She understood what the evaluation team was trying to accomplish. They weren't just looking for problems to fix. They were trying to understand the gap between official procedures and actual practices, between management expectations and frontline realities. The lunch service began with everyone distracted by thoughts of their upcoming interviews. The artificial politeness of the previous day had been replaced by genuine nervousness, about what they would be asked and how they should respond. Many of the kitchen staff had never been in a position where their individual opinions about operations mattered to anyone in authority. During the lunch prep, Sarah overheard Chef Williams on a phone call that revealed more about the evaluation process than he probably intended to share publicly. "Yes, I understand they need to interview everyone," he was saying, his voice tense with stress. "But some of these people barely speak English well enough to answer detailed questions about operations. What are they going to tell you about efficiency metrics and cost management?" The comment stung, even though Sarah knew it wasn't directed specifically at her. It revealed the assumptions that management made about their lower-level employees, assumptions that affected how the hotel operated and how problems were identified and solved. As the afternoon interviews began, Sarah watched her colleagues disappear one by one into the conference room that had been converted into an interview space. Each person emerged looking either relieved or more anxious than before, depending on how their session had gone. The unpredictability of the experience was adding to everyone's stress. "They asked me things I never thought about," said Jennifer after her interview, "like whether I thought the training I received was adequate, and what changes I would make if I was in charge of kitchen operations." "I didn't know what to say. Mine was all about communication," reported Marcus. "They wanted to know if information flows effectively between management and staff, whether problems get reported and addressed, whether we feel comfortable suggesting improvements. I felt like I was being tested on things I never learned." Sarah's interview was scheduled for late afternoon, during what would normally be the dinner prep period. She had been placed on the list as S. Chen, dishwashing custodial, confirming that she was seen as one of the least important employees to interview. The evaluation team was clearly working their way through the hierarchy, saving the supposedly least informed staff for last. When her time came, Sarah walked to the conference room with the same quiet composure she had maintained throughout her months at the hotel. The evaluation team was seated at a long table, with the lead evaluator in the center position and her two assistants flanking her with tablets and recording devices. "Please have a seat," the lead evaluator said, gesturing to a chair across from them. "I'm Margaret Stevens, Regional Operations Director for Grandview Hotels. We're conducting interviews with all staff members to understand how the hotel actually operates from the perspective of people who do the work every day." Sarah sat down, folding her hands in her lap and maintaining the same unassuming demeanor she had cultivated during her months in the kitchen. Margaret Stevens consulted her notes, clearly expecting this to be a brief, routine interview with someone who had limited insights to offer. "You've been working in the dishwashing department for about 3 months, is that correct?" Margaret asked. "Yes," Sarah replied simply. "And this is your first job in the hospitality industry?" Sarah paused for a moment, then said, "No, it isn't." Something in her tone made Margaret look up from her notes with increased attention. The two assistants also seemed to sense that this interview might be different from the others they had conducted. "What other experience do you have in hospitality?" Margaret asked, her professional curiosity clearly engaged. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table to Margaret. The lead evaluator picked it up, read it, and her expression changed dramatically. "Sarah Chen, Director of Operations, Grandview Hotels Corporate Division," Margaret read aloud, her voice rising with surprise and confusion. She looked up at Sarah with new recognition. "You're Sarah Chen?" The two assistants exchanged shocked glances, clearly trying to process what they were hearing. The quiet dishwasher they had barely noticed during their kitchen observations was apparently someone much more significant than anyone had realized. "Yes," Sarah said, her voice still calm but now carrying a different kind of authority. "I've been conducting an undercover operational assessment of this property for the past 3 months, as requested by senior management." Margaret stared at the business card, then back at Sarah as understanding dawned on her face. The comprehensive evaluation she had been conducting was only part of the assessment process. The real operational analysis had been happening invisibly, conducted by someone who had observed every detail of the hotel's actual functioning, while being completely overlooked by the staff whose work was being evaluated. "You've been here for 3 months," Margaret said, still processing the revelation. "Watching everything." "Everything," Sarah confirmed. "And I have detailed observations about operational efficiency, staff performance, management effectiveness, and improvement opportunities that go far beyond what traditional evaluation methods can reveal. The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. The quiet woman who had been dismissed, ignored, and treated as insignificant was actually the person who would have the greatest influence on the hotel's future. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Margaret Stevens stared at Sarah's business card, then back at the woman who had been invisible to the hotel staff for 3 months. The two assistants sat frozen, their tablets forgotten as they tried to comprehend the magnitude of what had just been revealed. "I think we need to start this conversation over," Margaret said finally, her professional composure returning as she processed the implications. "You've been conducting an undercover assessment of this entire operation while working as a dishwasher?" Sarah nodded, pulling out the notebook she had kept hidden throughout her employment at the hotel. "I've documented operational patterns, efficiency metrics, staff interactions, management effectiveness, and system failures that only become visible when you observe from the ground level over an extended period." Margaret leaned forward, her entire demeanor shifting from routine interviewer to colleague. "Senior management didn't tell me about your assessment. They said they were sending in a comprehensive evaluation team to determine the property's potential for improvement." "They were," Sarah replied. "You're evaluating the official operations, the procedures, policies, and systems that exist on paper. I've been evaluating the actual operations, how things really work, what problems aren't being reported, what opportunities aren't being recognized." Sarah opened her notebook and began sharing observations that immediately caught Margaret's attention. The real reasons behind the high food costs weren't poor supplier relationships, but systematic waste in prep procedures that could be eliminated with better training. The kitchen coordination problems weren't due to equipment limitations, but communication gaps that created inefficiencies throughout the service periods. "The staff turnover rate in housekeeping isn't due to low wages," Sarah continued, showing Margaret detailed notes about employee interactions. "It's because the scheduling system creates impossible workloads during peak periods while leaving people with insufficient hours during slower seasons. They're losing experienced employees who could train others effectively." Margaret's assistant scrambled to take notes as Sarah revealed insight after insight about the hotel's actual functioning. Every observation was backed up with specific examples, dates, and potential solutions. The comprehensive nature of her assessment was far beyond what their traditional evaluation methods could provide. "You observed all of this while working nights in the dishwashing department?" one of the assistants asked, clearly amazed by the scope of information Sarah had gathered. "The dishwashing station gave me visual access to the entire kitchen operation," Sarah explained. "The night shift allowed me to observe closing procedures, deep cleaning protocols, and staff interactions without the performance anxiety that comes with management oversight. The position was essentially invisible, which meant people behaved naturally around me." Margaret was quickly realizing that Sarah's undercover assessment had provided invaluable insights that their formal evaluation process couldn't capture. "What about staff morale and management effectiveness? Those are areas we've been struggling to assess accurately." Sarah's expression grew more serious as she addressed this question. "The staff care deeply about the quality of their work, but they feel disconnected from management decision-making. They see problems and have solutions, but there's no effective system for communicating ideas upward. Management makes policy changes without understanding the ground-level impact, which creates resistance and workarounds." She flipped through her notebook, showing examples of situations where staff had developed informal solutions to systemic problems, solutions that management didn't know existed and weren't being leveraged to improve official procedures. "Chef Williams is a skilled cook and genuinely committed to quality," Sarah continued, "but he's managing by crisis rather than managing systematically. He doesn't have the tools or training to address operational inefficiencies, so he focuses on maintaining standards through individual effort rather than system improvements." Margaret nodded, recognizing patterns she had observed during her own evaluation. "We've identified similar issues, but we couldn't understand the root causes. Your perspective explains a lot about why certain metrics aren't meeting corporate standards." The interview continued for over an hour, with Sarah sharing detailed analyses of every department she had observed during her 3 months at the hotel. Her insights revealed not just problems, but opportunities for improvements that could significantly enhance both operational efficiency and employee satisfaction. The front desk scheduling creates bottlenecks during check-in periods, she noted, but the staff have developed informal coordination systems that actually work better than the official procedures. If management recognized and formalized these adaptations, guest satisfaction scores would improve significantly. Margaret was taking extensive notes, realizing that Sarah's assessment would be crucial for developing an effective improvement plan. What about the overall potential of this property? Is it worth the investment to implement major operational changes? Sarah's response was immediate and confident. This hotel has exceptional potential. The location is excellent, the physical infrastructure is solid, and the staff are more capable and committed than management realizes. The problems are systemic, not fundamental. With the right changes to procedures, training, and communication systems, this property could become one of the most successful in the region. As the interview began to wind down, Margaret asked the question that had been building throughout their conversation. When do you plan to reveal your identity to the hotel staff? Sarah considered this carefully. I was planning to complete my assessment and submit my report to corporate before revealing my role. But given the timing of your evaluation, I think the staff deserve to understand what's been happening before decisions about their future are made. Margaret agreed. The kitchen staff especially have been under tremendous stress since we arrived. They think they're being judged for termination rather than evaluated for improvement opportunities. They are good people doing difficult work with inadequate systems, Sarah said firmly. They deserve to know that their efforts have been recognized and that changes are intended to make their jobs more manageable, not to replace them. The two evaluators began discussing how to handle the revelation of Sarah's true identity. The hotel staff would need to understand that the assessment process had been more comprehensive than they realized, but also that the purpose was improvement rather than punishment. I'd like to address the kitchen staff first, Sarah said. They're the ones who have worked alongside me for 3 months. They deserve to hear the truth directly from me before rumors and speculation take over. Margaret nodded in agreement. We can arrange for a kitchen meeting tomorrow morning before the breakfast service begins. That will give you the opportunity to explain your role and your findings before we present our combined recommendations to senior management. As the interview concluded, Margaret looked at Sarah with professional respect and personal admiration. 3 months undercover in a demanding job while conducting comprehensive operational analysis. That's dedication to thoroughness that goes well beyond normal corporate assessment protocols. Sarah smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression she had shown since revealing her identity. Sometimes you have to see how things really work before you can understand how to make them work better. The kitchen staff taught me more about effective operations than I could have learned from any management report. Tomorrow, the truth would be revealed to the people who had unknowingly worked alongside one. Wednesday morning arrived with an unusual quiet in the Grand Palace Hotel kitchen. Word had spread through the overnight staff that there would be an all-hands meeting before the breakfast service began, but no one knew what to expect. The corporate evaluation team had finished their interviews the previous day, and rumors about impending changes had everyone on edge. Sarah arrived at her usual time, but instead of heading to the dishwashing station, she went directly to the staff locker room to prepare for what would be the most difficult conversation of her professional career. She had spent months working alongside these people, sharing their frustrations and observing their dedication, all while maintaining a deception that had been necessary for her assessment, but painful on a personal level. At 6:30 in the morning, the entire kitchen staff assembled in the main prep area. Chef William stood nervously at the front, flanked by Margaret Stevens and her evaluation team. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone expecting to hear about layoffs, demotions, or major operational changes that would disrupt their working lives. Before we begin, Margaret announced, I want to introduce someone who has been working with our evaluation process in a way that none of you were aware of. Sarah stepped forward from where she had been standing quietly at the back of the group. Several of her colleagues glanced at her with mild surprise, wondering why the dishwasher was being singled out during a management meeting. For the past 3 months, Margaret continued, this woman has been conducting a comprehensive operational assessment of this hotel while working alongside all of you in the kitchen. Confused murmurs rippled through the assembled staff. Sarah could see the puzzlement on their faces as they tried to understand what Margaret was saying. Marco was frowning, clearly trying to figure out what role a dishwasher could play in a corporate evaluation. Sarah took a deep breath and spoke in a clear, confident voice that immediately commanded attention in a way her previous months of quiet work had never done. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm the Director of Operations for Grandview Hotel's corporate division. I've been working here undercover for 3 months to understand how this hotel actually functions from the ground level up. The silence that followed was profound and shocking. Every face in the room registered complete disbelief, followed quickly by a range of emotions from embarrassment to anger to confusion. Chef Williams's mouth fell open as he stared at the woman he had been ordering around for months. Marco looked like he had been struck by lightning, remembering every dismissive comment he had made about the dish girl. "You're kidding," whispered Jennifer, her voice barely audible. I'm actually a corporate executive who spent 3 months washing your dishes, observing your work, and learning how this kitchen really operates," Sarah confirmed. "Everything I observed during that time will be part of the assessment that determines this hotel's future direction." The implications of this revelation were sinking in with devastating clarity. Every casual insult, every dismissive comment, every assumption about Sarah's background and capabilities was suddenly viewed in a completely different light. The woman they had ignored and looked down upon had been evaluating their performance and behavior the entire time. Tony stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "So you were spying on us, pretending to be one of us while really working for corporate to find reasons to fire people?" Sarah's response was firm but compassionate. "I was observing actual operations to understand the difference between how this hotel is supposed to work and how it actually works. My goal was never to find fault with individual employees, but to identify systemic problems that make your jobs more difficult than they need to be." She pulled out her notebook and opened it to pages filled with detailed observations. "I documented the ways that poor inventory systems force you to waste time looking for supplies. I noted how inadequate scheduling creates periods of dangerous understaffing, followed by expensive overstaffing. I recorded examples of how communication breakdowns between management and staff create problems that affect service quality." Chef Williams finally found his voice, though it came out strained and uncertain. All the orders I gave you. You were evaluating my management the whole time." "I was observing how the kitchen functions under your leadership," Sarah replied carefully. "And what I saw was a dedicated professional trying to maintain quality standards despite operational systems that don't provide adequate support. Your commitment to food quality never wavered, even when other pressures made your job unnecessarily difficult." Margaret stepped forward to address the group's obvious anxiety. The purpose of this assessment wasn't to find reasons for termination or punishment. It was to identify opportunities for improvement that would benefit both the hotel's performance and the working conditions for all employees. Rebecca raised her hand tentatively. "What happens now? Are we all going to be replaced by people who don't know that we were—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah understood the fear behind the question. "Nothing you said or did during my time here will result in disciplinary action or termination. I was observing systems and procedures, not judging individual character or worth. The casual conversations and interactions I witnessed were exactly what I needed to see. How people behave naturally when they're not being formally evaluated." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person who had worked alongside her. "What I observed over these 3 months was a group of professionals who cared deeply about their work, who have developed effective solutions to problems that management didn't even know existed, and who deserve operational systems that support their efforts rather than creating unnecessary obstacles." Marco spoke up, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine curiosity. "So what changes are going to happen? Are they going to shut down the kitchen and start over?" Margaret answered this question directly. "Based on the combined assessments, we're recommending significant operational improvements, but not staff replacement. Better inventory systems, improved scheduling procedures, enhanced communication protocols, and additional training opportunities. The goal is to make this hotel more successful by making your jobs more manageable." Sarah nodded in agreement. "The staff here are capable of excellence when given proper support. The changes we're recommending are designed to provide that support, rather than to replace the people who already understand this operation." As the meeting continued, the initial shock and embarrassment began to give way to practical questions about the upcoming changes. The kitchen staff were beginning to understand that Sarah's assessment had actually provided them with an advocate at the corporate level someone who had experienced their daily challenges firsthand and could speak credibly about solutions. "I have one question," said Chef Williams, his voice steadier now. "Why didn't you just come in as a corporate executive and observe operations directly? Why go through all this deception?" Sarah's answer was thoughtful and honest. "Because when corporate executives visit, everyone performs differently. People are more careful, more formal, more focused on appearing competent than on working efficiently. I needed to see how this hotel actually functions on a daily basis, not how it functions during a management visit." She gestured toward her notebook. "These 3 months of observations will allow us to implement changes that address real problems rather than perceived problems. The improvements we make will actually help you do your jobs better, because they're based on understanding how you actually work." As the meeting concluded and the kitchen staff prepared to begin their breakfast service, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The fear and uncertainty of the past few days had been replaced by cautious optimism about improvements that would make their working lives better rather than more difficult. Sarah returned to the dishwashing station one final time, not to resume her undercover role, but to complete the transition back to her true identity. As she worked alongside the staff who now knew who she really was, she reflected on the valuable lessons learned during her 3 months of invisible observation. The kitchen operated more smoothly that morning than it had since the corporate evaluation began, with staff members working naturally instead of performing for unseen judges. The revelation of Sarah's true identity had somehow freed them to be themselves again, knowing that their real capabilities had been recognized and valued by someone who understood their work intimately. The Grand Palace Hotel was about to undergo significant changes, but for the first time in months those changes were being driven by genuine understanding rather than distant assessment. The woman they had dismissed as insignificant had become their most powerful advocate for operational improvement.